It's founded by Christ, right? We can trace it back, right? Not everybody can do that. Just 2 weeks ago, I was, are you familiar with Curren Financial? Yes? Oh, very good. So Curren Financial asked me to come and do a seminar for all their regional salespeople, and I had to give a seminar and teach them about all of the Christian denominations and basically the Christian family tree. So I was doing a seminar for them so that as they were going into different churches, they can, because it used to be Lutheran, or Curren Financial for Lutherans, right? And of course that changed several years ago, and so they're struggling to learn about it. That was a ton of fun, but what was eye-opening for them is the number of Christian churches where, once you start seeing where they broke off and why they broke off, you start to understand why Catholics take a lot of pride in that we can trace it all the way back, right? And so that is a source of pride. That in truth, all the other Christian churches can't say it in the same way that we can, right? Now, Lutherans would be the next closest in line to us because, of course, but for 1,000 years, 1,500 years, we basically, well, we were two churches. 1,000 years ago, we broke east-west, right? And of course, Pope Francis is doing everything he can to reunite that. He just did that down in Mexico. And then we broke again in 1500. Now, do you know how many denominations? So at that point, even though they didn't call them denominations, there was basically like a dozen-ish, right? 1500. Now, 500 years since, do you know how many Christian denominations in the United States alone there are, according to the IRS? Well, you got to have some measuring stick, right? So by their definition, in order to qualify as a church institution, you have to have certain requirements, right? So, how many do you think?
38,000.
38,000. You're actually not far off. You'll change your answer? Yeah, conservative estimates say that there's actually about near 40 to 45,000 denominations. So for 1,500 years, there really was only a couple, a couple breaks here and there. But then, bam! Like they're all over the place, right? So, yeah, it's a source of pride. So when we talk about being Catholic in this journey of Lent, all of this stuff matters, right? This is who we are. It's all of it. It is absolutely all of it. It is the saints. It is Mary. It is our sacramental nature. It is the missionary nature of the church. That's who we are, and it all has a purpose. It's not someone sitting in a back room somewhere saying, I think we should get into school business. Let's get into school business. That's not how it happened, right? If you understand our church history, you understand that the Catholic nature is always about easing people's pain, or we would term it brokenness, right? We got into schools, we got into hospitals, especially here in America. Why? What's that? To help people, but what was happening that caused us to really accelerate the growth of Catholic schools and hospitals and cemeteries? And it happened in particular right around the turn of the century in the early 1900s. Immigration. What was happening to the immigrants? That's right. That's right. And there was even question about whether they could even be buried in a regular cemetery. The kids were being persecuted in school, verbally and sometimes physically. And so the church stepped in and they created, by the time we got to World War II, the sociologists had even termed it Catholic ghettos. Right? That we became a community that would take care of everybody. In our schools, the mission of the Catholic schools was to educate the poor kids that nobody else wanted to educate. Right? That was our mission. And so it was always about solving problems. It was always about easing pain. Well, that's critical to understanding what it really means to be Catholic. See, what it really means to be Catholic always comes back to sacrifice. It always does. It is why we are a sacramental church, right? What happens at this table when there's not all these books here? What this looks like my living room. What happens at the table is an interaction between God and priest and people we don't get Eucharist, right? We become Eucharist, right? And so by becoming Eucharist, it means that we accept the same brokenness of the bread. When we break the bread, it is the invitation to literally break ourselves. I don't know if you're aware of that or not, but that's really what's going on. And so that's Catholic theology, because that's the nature of the church. The church is to always be breaking itself so that growth can happen. It is the vine and the branches. You prune the vine so that more fruit can come from the branches, right? There's hundreds of scriptural passages that reference all of this. We are a sacramental church for a reason, right? The four pillars, the four hallmarks, the four cornerstones of our church is one, holy Catholic apostolic, right? And someone, we can spit that off like, we know what it is, right? One, holy Catholic apostolic. Thank you, creed, right? We could say it in the creed, we could say it backwards, right? Maybe not. But what does it really mean? What does it really mean, one, holy Catholic apostolic, right? Those are great terms, but do you understand the deep significance which leads us into our Lent journey? What are we trying to do in Lent? Why does the church go on this journey every single year? The oneness actually comes out of the letter to Ephesians. Okay? It's that we are one church. There is one church. Now the church may be hurt, the church may be bruised, the church may be wounded. We may have self-wounded ourselves, which we've done many times throughout history. We may be fractured, as we have when the churches began to split up. But there is one church because there is one God. It comes to us from the book of Ephesians. And if you open up the book of Ephesians, you're Catholics, you wouldn't have the Bibles here. We can laugh at it. It's okay. Let it go. It's all right. In the book of Ephesians, there's one piece there in the 4th chapter. There's only 6 chapters in the book of Ephesians. In the 4th chapter, this is where that oneness comes from, right? As Paul is explaining to us, he says, I then, a prisoner for the Lord, urge you to live in a manner worthy of the call that you have received. Now, we've heard this probably many times, right? Live a life worthy of the call that you have received, with all humility and gentleness, with patience, bearing with one another through love, striving to preserve the unity of the Spirit through the bond of peace. We are one body and one Spirit. As we are also called to one hope of, we are also called to the one hope in the one Lord, one faith, one baptism, one God, Father of all, who is over all and through all. That the reminder is, especially as the church, the church was starting to spread out, right? That's why they were writing these letters. They weren't writing these, the scribes were writing the letter. Paul probably never wrote it himself. But his scribe, meaning the person who would write it for them, was writing all this stuff. Well, they were writing it to people who were in towns all over the place, right? In Corinth, Corinthians, thus the Romans, right? And so they're writing all these letters to unify the church that was beginning to be fractured. They said, look, no matter where we go, no matter what happens here, we are one church. Yes, we're going to do things differently from place to place. Yes. We are one church. And the urging was, you've got to start to see yourself as one church. One Spirit. And it's not because of what we do, but because of whose church it really is. If God is Father of all, and the Spirit ministers to all, then we, by our command of Christ, are to care for all. And so it was a reminder that as the church was being fractured, and I say that during our Lenten journey because that's an internal thing. We struggle with that in the Catholic Church today, do we not? Everywhere I go, do you know what I hear? There is a constant battle between the liberals and the conservatives. First of all, I hate those terms. But they're terms because people need them. And what they really mean is when they say, well, that's a liberal priest, or that's a conservative priest, or that's a liberal bishop, or that's a conservative. What they really mean is, because it's usually said in a manner that is not becoming of the call of Christ, right? And what it really means is, you don't think like I do. Ergo, my way is the right way, by the way. Right? And so the litmus test is, if you think like me, you're one of us. If you don't, You're not. You're the one who's driving the church, to the brink of disaster here. Right? And we've heard it. That was made very public during the Synod of the Family. Correct? We saw that amongst all of our brother bishops, which is okay. That didn't bother me at all. I think it's great that they argue and debate about things. That's how the Spirit moves. That's a good thing. But we saw that on public display. Right? Are you with me or against me? Is Pope Francis the savior of the church, or is he the devil of the church, right? What are you talking about? It's the same Spirit. There's one God, one Spirit, right? It wasn't a different color smoke that came up there. You can't say that the Spirit was around for Pope John Paul or Pope Benedict but not Pope Francis, or the Spirit skipped the day, he was out of town the day that they voted for Pope Benedict, but he showed up for Francis. Like, it doesn't work that way. Right? But it is how we treat each other, isn't it? And if we're divided here, what does it say? I love the way you phrased it. That's the mission. This isn't the mission field. That's the mission field. And if we're divided here, if we don't recall ourselves, if we don't watch our own language, remember, we're one church. One church. One God. And throughout all of history, all the goods, the bads, the sins, the human sin that has crept into the church and divided us, among all that, the church keeps moving. Why? Because there's one Spirit, one God that's driving this bus. Not us. Not us. That's why we hold tight to our historic roots. Sometimes it comes across almost arrogant, right? Well, we're the original, you're the default. And that's not what it's meant to be, but it is why we're very proud of that. Because even though we admit all of our human error, we've had a lot of them, we've even had some recently, we still have it. It is the one church. And the true test of any church is admitting when we're off kilter and get back on course, right? Because we are human. But that's the Spirit. That's always the discernment of the Spirit. That's a gift of the church. Holy. When we say one holy. Holy is not us. It's not the worthy chosen individuals because we are the ones who come to church every week. That's not. It's holy because it's God's church. Right? It is not of us. It is of God. And it's holy because it is the Lord's church. And the Lord instituted this church, right? But it's holy because we, see, there is the church, there is the church, and then there is the church, right? There's building, but the building never defines us. Now, some parishes, I would argue, have forgotten that because they're trying to outdo everybody with architecture and paintings. It's a building. At the end of the day, it's a building, right? Just like the temple. When they were exiled, it was a building, right? A really old building, but it was a building. We are the church. And it's holy because we have the ability to bless others if we go back to the first one and remember that it's one church. If we forget that it's one church and that everybody that we encounter has been invited into this church, if we forget that, then we forget that we have the ability to bless. We have the ability to anoint. We have the ability to bring that peace and that comfort, not in our name, in the Lord's name. That's what it means to be a holy church, right? It is a sanctifying thing. Catholic, you probably know the word Catholic is a Greek word that actually means universal, right? So it's often termed in the small c, which interestingly enough is why when we say the creeds, which by the way, not only just Catholics are the only ones who say the Nicene Creed, right? Why they say Catholic, they didn't remove the word because Catholic, we're not talking about the religion Catholic, we're talking universal church, right? And so it's universal because everything that God wanted His earthly church to have, it has. It has. Probably the thing I hear most when I travel around the country doing what I do is, especially because I used to work, used to, I still do. I speak to about 50,000 kids every year all over the United States. And what I often hear when I go to parishes is, what's happening with all the young people, right? They don't come anymore, right? The young people don't come anymore. And I look at it and say, okay, yeah, that's true. I mean, if the eyeball test, you don't even need to do statistics to figure out the eyeball test saying, well, they're getting to be smaller and smaller. Our schools are dropping enrollment. Our religious eds are dropping enrollment. Our young adults aren't coming either, right? And so when you look at that, you say, well, what's happening? I take a step back from it and say, has God not provided? Or are we looking in the wrong place? Again, if you understand it's God's church, if you understand that that church is anointed and blessed, you understand that when God brings fruit to something, He doesn't half bring fruit to it, right? He anoints, He brings in abundance, right? It's right out of the Scriptures. The church has everything it needs to be successful. If we're struggling, it's probably our